I never thought the first real betrayal of my life would come from my own child. One quiet morning, my phone buzzed with a message that seemed harmless at first, but as I read the words, my heart dropped. In that moment, I realized my home, my independence, and everything I had built over decades were being questioned, without my consent. I had raised her with love, protected her with everything I had, and trusted her completely. Yet now, I was being treated like a problem to solve, not a mother to respect. That single message became the beginning of a fight I never expected to face. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Parker. I am 71 years old, and I have lived in the same house in Santa Fe, New Mexico for more than 4 decades. 5 years have passed since my husband, Robert, died of lung cancer, yet some mornings I still wake up expecting to hear him humming in the kitchen while making coffee. Grief does not disappear with time. It simply learns how to live quietly beside you. Our house sits on a quiet street lined with adobe walls and desert plants. It is an old Spanish-style home with thick stucco walls, wooden beams, and wide windows that let the sunlight pour in every morning. Robert and I bought it when we were young and brave and convinced we could fix anything together. We painted the walls ourselves. We planted lavender and cactus in the backyard. We argued about furniture and laughed about it later. Every corner holds a memory. Each morning, I follow the same gentle routine. I wake up before sunrise, make a pot of coffee, and sit by the window watching the sky change colors over the mountains. Then, I water my plants, check my emails, and spend an hour painting at the small desk near the living room window. Art has always been my refuge. It reminds me that beauty still exists, even in quiet seasons of life. On weekends, I teach a small art class for neighborhood children at the community center. Their laughter fills the room, and their messy paintings remind me that creativity does not belong only to the young. During the week, I walk to the local bookstore, chat with the owner, and sometimes stop by the cafe where the staff already knows my order. I am not invisible here. People know my name. They greet me with warmth. I manage my own finances, pay my own bills, and drive myself wherever I need to go. My doctor says my health is excellent for my age. I take care of my body, stretch every morning, and refuse to let numbers define my worth. I have never liked the idea that growing older means becoming smaller. Of course, loneliness visits me sometimes. At night, when the house is quiet, I miss Robert most. His old jacket still hangs in the closet. His toolbox remains in the garage. I keep it exactly where he left it. These are not signs of weakness. They are proof that love once lived here. My daughter Lauren used to be part of this rhythm. When she was younger, she called me every evening. We talked about everything: her dreams, her fears, her small victories. After she married Brian and moved closer to the city, those calls slowly became shorter and less frequent. Work, family, and stress filled her schedule. I told myself it was normal. Children grow, lives change. Still, I could not ignore the quiet shift. Text messages replaced phone calls. Conversations felt rushed. Sometimes days passed without hearing from her. I wondered if I had done something wrong, or if this was simply how modern families drifted apart. Despite everything, I believed in my independence. I believed in my strength. I believed my daughter understood who I was, a capable woman who had built a life with her own hands. I never imagined that anyone would see me as a burden or a problem to solve. Looking back, there were small signs, pauses in conversations, questions that felt slightly out of place, a tone that sounded more concerned than caring. At the time, I brushed them aside. I thought my life was steady. I thought my place in this family was secure. I did not know that one ordinary morning, a single message on my phone would quietly begin to unravel everything I believed about love, trust, and home. If you are still watching and feeling connected to this quiet beginning, please the comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me. Because what happened next completely changed the direction of my life. Now, let us move on to chapter 2. That morning began like so many others in my quiet life. I woke before the sun, wrapped myself in a soft sweater, and walked barefoot across the cool tile floor to the kitchen. Outside, the desert sky was painted in pale shades of pink and gold. The mountains stood still in the distance, watching over the city as they always had. I brewed my coffee slowly, enjoying the familiar sound of water dripping into the pot. For a few minutes, the world felt peaceful and predictable. After watering my plants and opening the windows to let in fresh air, I sat down at my small painting desk. I'd been working on a landscape inspired by the hills near my house, and I was eager to add a few more details. My phone lay face down beside my sketchbook, silent and forgotten. I did not expect anything unusual. Most days, it barely made a sound. Then, suddenly, it vibrated against the wooden surface. The soft buzzing startled me more than it should have. I glanced at the screen and saw Lauren's name. My heart lifted for a moment. It had been days since I had heard from her. A message from my daughter, especially this early in the morning, felt unexpected and strangely important. I unlocked the phone and read her words. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation. We found a retirement community for you. It is for your safety." That was all. No, "Good morning." No, "How are you feeling today?" No, "I love you." Just a sentence that felt more like a business proposal than a message from a daughter to her mother. I stared at the screen, unsure if I had read it correctly. Then I read it again, and again. Each time the words felt heavier. A second message followed a few seconds later. It was a digital brochure filled with glossy photographs, bright hallways, smiling seniors, a swimming pool, a dining room that looked like a hotel restaurant. Everything was polished, organized, and strangely impersonal. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair. For a long moment, I simply sat there, listening to the ticking of the kitchen clock. My coffee grew cold. The sunlight moved slowly across the floor. Life continued, unaware that something inside me had shifted. Was I giving her a reason to worry? I asked myself. Had I forgotten something important? Had I seemed confused during our last conversation? I searched my memory carefully. I remembered paying my bills on time. I remembered driving to the grocery store without getting lost. I remembered teaching my art class just days before. Nothing suggested that I was losing control. Yet, here was my daughter, already planning my future without me. I picked up the brochure again and scrolled through the pages. Words like "soy," assisted living, 24-hour support, and supervised care jumped out at me. They felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life, not mine. I had never imagined myself in a place like that. Not now. Not yet. My thoughts drifted back to Lauren, as a little girl, holding my hand on her first day of school, afraid to walk into the classroom alone. I had promised her then that I would always be there for her. I had kept that promise. Had she forgotten? Part of me wanted to believe this was simply concern. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she had convinced herself that she was helping me. I tried to hold on to that explanation. It was easier than accepting any darker possibility. Still, something felt wrong. I had not been asked what I wanted. I had not been consulted. A decision had been made about my life without my voice. That realization settled quietly in my chest, heavy and uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and typed a short reply, telling her that we could talk soon. As I pressed send, I sensed that this conversation would not be simple. It would open a door that could not easily be closed. And once that door opened, nothing in my life would ever feel quite the same again. If you are still watching and starting to feel the tension behind that simple message, please comment number 2 below to let me know you are with me. What I discovered after this will shock you. Now, let us move on to chapter 3. I spent more time than usual preparing for Noah's birthday party. Standing in front of my bedroom mirror, I changed my blouse twice before settling on a soft blue one Robert had once told me made my eyes look brighter. I wrapped his gift carefully, tying the ribbon into a neat bow, hoping that this afternoon would feel warm and familiar, the way family gatherings used to feel. A part of me still believed that Lauren's message had been misunderstood, that everything would make sense once we sat down together. Her house was only 20 minutes away, but the drive felt longer. My hands rested tightly on the steering wheel, and I kept replaying her words in my mind. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had rehearsed several calm, reasonable ways to begin the conversation. The front yard was decorated with a few colorful balloons tied to the fence. A banner reading "Happy Birthday, Noah" hung slightly crooked above the garage. Inside, however, the atmosphere did not match the cheerful decorations. There were only a handful of guests, mostly relatives. The music was low. Conversations sounded polite but distant, as if everyone were careful not to say too much. Lauren greeted me with a quick hug and a nervous smile. She thanked me for coming, then hurried back to the kitchen. Noah ran over, hugged me tightly, and showed me his new video game. For a brief moment, I felt grounded again. He was still my grandson, still the same sweet boy. Then I noticed Brian. He stood near the dining table, dressed in a pressed shirt and jacket, holding a leather briefcase. It looked completely out of place among paper plates and birthday cake. When he saw me, he nodded politely, but there was something stiff in his expression, as if he were preparing for a presentation rather than celebrating a teenager's birthday. After most of the guests had settled in, Brian cleared space at the end of the table and placed his briefcase on it. He opened it and pulled out a laptop and several folders. Without asking, he connected the computer to a small screen mounted on the wall. Charts appeared, numbers, property estimates, market trends. He began speaking in a calm, confident voice about real estate values in Santa Fe, about underutilized assets, and long-term financial planning. My name appeared on one of the slides, next to a photograph of my house that I had never seen before. No one had asked if I was comfortable with this discussion. No one had asked if I wanted it. I sat there, holding a paper cup of lemonade, feeling as though I were watching someone else's life being dissected. Each sentence reduced my home, my memories, my independence into neat columns of potential profit. As I tried to follow what he was saying, my eyes drifted to the folders spread across the table. One document caught my attention. The heading looked familiar. My breath caught when I recognized it. It was a copy of my property title, stamped, official, cleanly reproduced. My heart began to pound. I knew exactly what that document was and how difficult it was to obtain. I had never given permission for anyone to request it. I had never authorized anyone to handle my legal records. I looked at Lauren. She avoided my eyes. In that moment, something inside me shifted. This was not concern. This was preparation. This was planning. I forced myself to remain still. I smiled when Noah blew out his candles. I clapped when everyone sang. I thanked Lauren for the cake. I did not want to ruin her son's birthday with my fear and anger, but inside, I was unraveling. When the party ended, I hugged Noah goodbye and told him how proud I was of him. Then I walked to my car in silence. As I drove home through the darkening streets, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. They had gathered my documents. They had studied my property. They had made plans without me, and I knew with painful clarity that I could no longer afford to trust them blindly. Something was very wrong. And I was determined to find out exactly what it was. If you are still watching and realizing that this was never just about concern, please comment number 3 below to let me know you are with me, because what I found next was far worse than I imagined. Now, let us move on to chapter 4. That night, after returning from Noah's birthday party, I did not turn on the lights. I closed the front door quietly and stood in the hallway, surrounded by darkness. The familiar shape of my furniture was barely visible, yet it felt different, as if my home had suddenly become uncertain ground. I placed my purse on the table, sat down on the couch, and stared at the wall for a long time, replaying the image of that document in my mind. The stamped copy of my property title refused to leave my thoughts. Sleep did not come easily. I lay in bed listening to the hum of the heater and the distant sound of traffic, wondering how long this had been happening without my knowledge. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brian's charts and Lauren's avoided gaze. By morning, I felt drained and restless. Over the next few days, my uneasiness followed me everywhere. I found it difficult to focus on my painting. My hands hesitated over the canvas, and colors that once felt natural now seemed uncertain. During my art class, I forgot simple instructions and had to apologize to my students for losing my train of thought. Even routine tasks, like grocery shopping, felt heavier than usual. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message that would confirm my fears. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Families sometimes discuss finances. Perhaps Brian had accessed public records legally. Perhaps Lauren had only meant well. But deep inside, I knew something was wrong. My instincts, sharpened by years of life experience, refused to be silenced. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork in my study, I found a business card tucked inside a folder. Margaret Lewis, attorney at law. She had helped Robert and me revise our wills more than 10 years ago. I remembered her as thorough, patient, and honest. For 2 days, I stared at that card without calling. Part of me feared that involving a lawyer would make everything real. On the 3rd day, I finally dialed her number. Her office was located in a quiet brick building near the courthouse. When I arrived, the waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Margaret greeted me warmly, but became serious as soon as I began explaining. I told her about the message, the party, the presentation, and the copied document. My voice trembled despite my efforts to remain composed. She listened carefully, taking notes. Then she asked permission to review my records. While she worked at her computer, I watched her expression change. Her eyebrows slowly drew together. She clicked through several screens, then leaned back in her chair. She explained that there had been an inquiry connected to my property, suggesting a potential refinancing application that I had never submitted. The information was incomplete, but it carried signs of unauthorized access. Even more troubling, she revealed that Lauren had contacted her office months earlier to ask general questions about establishing power of attorney, claiming it was for future convenience. Hearing that felt like a physical blow. I sat there in silence, struggling to breathe normally. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. Instead, Shame and disappointment flooded me. I wondered how long I had been blind. Margaret advised me to remain calm and begin documenting everything. She suggested saving messages, recording dates of conversations, and securing copies of my legal documents. Her tone was gentle but firm. She did not want me to panic, but she wanted me to be prepared. That evening, I returned home and opened a notebook. On the first page, I wrote the date and began listing every strange interaction I could remember. I backed up files on my computer and locked important papers in a small safe. When Lauren called later that week, I spoke to her politely, as if nothing had changed. I laughed at the right moments. I asked about Noah. I pretended everything was normal. Inside, I was watching carefully. The woman who had once trusted blindly was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that love did not guarantee honesty. And I knew that whatever came next, I would have to face it with open eyes and steady resolve. If you are still watching and feeling the weight of this betrayal, please comment number 4 below to let me know you are with me. The truth is about to come out in a way no one expected. Now, let us move on to chapter 5. In the weeks that followed my meeting with Margaret, I lived in a strange state of quiet vigilance. Outwardly, nothing in my routine appeared to change. I still taught my art class, watered my plants, and exchanged polite messages with Lauren. Inwardly, however, I was constantly alert. Every phone call, every delayed reply, every unusual question felt like a clue waiting to be interpreted. I began keeping careful records. I saved emails, took screenshots of text messages, and wrote down dates and times of conversations in my notebook. At night, I reviewed these notes like a detective studying evidence, hoping patterns would emerge. The process exhausted me, yet it also gave me a sense of control. At least I was no longer blind. The first real crack in the illusion came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while browsing the local news website, I recognized Brian's name in a business article. The headline mentioned an investment group filing a lawsuit against a former partner for misrepresentation and financial misconduct. I clicked on it with trembling hands. There he was, described in careful legal language, accused of misleading clients and diverting funds. My stomach tightened. Until that moment, I had suspected financial trouble. Now, I was facing documented proof. I forwarded the article to Margaret. Within hours, she called me back and confirmed what I feared. Brian was involved in a serious civil case, and the potential penalties were severe. More troubling still, she discovered that Lauren had co-signed several high-risk loans connected to his failed ventures. The total liability exceeded $300,000. Hearing that number felt unreal. It was more money than I had ever owed in my entire life. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after the call, staring at my hands. They looked the same as always, slightly wrinkled, steady. Yet my world was collapsing around them. A few days later, another blow followed. My phone rang in the early afternoon. The caller introduced herself as a real estate agent. She spoke politely and casually, asking whether I was ready to proceed with selling my property and whether I had selected a closing date. For a moment, I could not speak. I told her calmly that my house was not for sale and that she must have made a mistake. She apologized and ended the call, sounding confused. I contacted Margaret immediately. She investigated and called me back later that evening. Her voice was tight with concern. There was, in fact, a preliminary purchase agreement on file. A small deposit had been placed through an intermediary company. The documents listed me as the owner but bore signatures that were not mine. They had been submitted without my knowledge or consent. My daughter had helped initiate the process. That realization shattered something inside me. This was no longer about misplaced concern or misguided planning. This was an attempt to take control of my home, my security, my life. I felt dizzy. Memories flooded my mind. Lauren's childhood laughter, her graduation day, her wedding. I searched those moments desperately for signs of this person I was now confronting. I found none. That night, I barely slept. I walked through my house, touching the walls, the shelves, the door frames, as if confirming that they still belonged to me. Every object felt fragile, as though it might disappear without warning. By morning, my sorrow had hardened into clarity. There could be no compromise with deception. There could be no peace built on betrayal. If they were willing to sell my home behind my back, they were capable of far worse. I closed my notebook and wrote one final sentence beneath my latest entry. I will not surrender my life to anyone's desperation. With that, I knew the time for hesitation was over. The real battle was about to begin. After learning the truth about the attempted sale of my home, I felt as though I were drifting through my own life like a ghost. Each morning, I woke with the heavy pressure in my chest, unsure whether I was grieving for my daughter, my lost trust, or the version of myself who had once believed love was enough to keep people honest. Even simple tasks required effort. I moved slowly, cautiously, as if one wrong step might cause everything to collapse. I met with Margaret again only 3 days later. This time, our conversation carried a sense of urgency. She explained in careful and precise language how vulnerable my situation had become. Unauthorized documents, false signatures, and financial desperation created a dangerous combination. If I hesitated too long, I could lose control of my property through manipulation or legal confusion. Her words were not dramatic. They were factual. That made them even more frightening. She introduced the idea of establishing a living trust. Margaret described it as a legal structure that would transfer ownership of my assets into a protected entity while allowing me full use of them during my lifetime. The trust would prevent unauthorized sales, block unauthorized loans, and require independent oversight for any future changes. In simple terms, it would place a strong wall between my home and anyone who wished to exploit it. As she spoke, I listened carefully, yet my heart resisted every sentence. Signing those documents would mean admitting that my own daughter could not be trusted. It would mean drawing a legal boundary where an emotional one should have existed naturally. It felt like a betrayal of everything I believed motherhood represented. That night, I barely slept. I walked through my house in the darkness, guided by memory rather than light. I paused in front of framed photographs. Lauren at 5 years old with missing front teeth, Lauren in her graduation gown, Lauren on her wedding day smiling beside Brian. I remembered staying up late sewing costumes, attending every school performance, comforting her after heartbreaks. I had given her my time, my energy, my faith. Had any of that mattered? I sat on the edge of my bed and cried quietly, afraid that if I allowed myself to sob, I might never stop. In the early hours of the morning, I brewed tea and sat by the window. The sky slowly brightened, turning from deep blue to soft gray. Watching that transformation, I felt something shift inside me. I realized that loving my daughter did not require surrendering my dignity. Protecting myself did not mean I loved her less. It meant I valued my own life enough to defend it. I called Margaret later that day and scheduled the appointment. When I sat in her office again, the documents were already prepared. They lay neatly stacked on the desk, waiting. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the pen. Each signature felt heavy, final, and strangely liberating. With every page, I was choosing myself, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of necessity. When I finished, Margaret collected the papers and assured me that the trust would be registered within days. She reminded me that this protection was not a punishment. It was a safeguard. I nodded, unable to speak. Back home, I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it. Tears streamed down my face, but they were mixed with relief. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. There would be consequences. There would be confrontation. Yet, beneath the fear, I felt something new. Stability. For the first time in weeks, I knew that my home was truly mine again. Whatever came next, I would face it standing on solid ground. If you are still watching and wondering whether I made the right choice, please comment number 6 below to let me know you are with me. Because what my family did next that crossed a line I never thought they would. Now, let us move on to chapter 7. I knew Lauren would eventually discover the changes I had made to my estate, but I was not prepared for how quickly her reaction would arrive. Only a week after the living trust was finalized, my phone began ringing early one morning. When I saw her name on the screen, my heart tightened. I hesitated before answering, already sensing that this conversation would not be gentle. Her voice was sharp and strained. She demanded explanations. She accused me of listening to strangers instead of my own family. She said I had humiliated her and undermined her role as my daughter. I listened quietly, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, trying not to let her anger pull me into a fight. After that call, the messages began. Long texts filled with blame and disappointment. She questioned my judgment. She implied that I was confused, emotional, and easily influenced. Reading her words felt like watching someone slowly erase the woman she had known all her life and replace her with a fragile stranger. Within days, the situation escalated. A certified letter arrived in my mailbox, thick and official looking. My hand shook as I opened it at the dining table. It informed me that Lauren had petitioned the court for a capacity evaluation, claiming concern about my mental competence. She requested that my ability to manage my own affairs be formally assessed. For several minutes, I could not breathe. I had expected anger. I had expected silence. I had not expected my own child to challenge my sanity. That night, sleep abandoned me. I lay awake listening to the creaks of the house, wondering how love had turned into suspicion so quickly. Every doubt I had ever had about myself returned at once. Was I forgetting things? Was I slower than before? Had I truly made the right choice? Fear has a way of magnifying uncertainty. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I felt as though I were on trial, not for a crime, but for existing beyond my daughter's control. Simple mistakes, like misplacing my glasses or forgetting a grocery item, suddenly felt dangerous. I began second-guessing myself constantly. My community noticed the change. My neighbor brought over homemade soup and sat with me in the afternoons. My art students wrote me small notes of encouragement. The cafe owner slipped extra cookies into my bag without comment. Their quiet kindness reminded me that I was still seen as capable, still respected. Margaret helped me prepare for the evaluation. She gathered my medical records, financial statements, and documentation of my daily activities. She encouraged me to remain calm and honest. She reminded me that this process was designed to protect people, not punish them, even when it was misused. The morning of the assessment, I dressed carefully and arrived early. The clinic was clean and brightly lit, yet it felt cold. I sat in the waiting room, watching the clock, feeling as though my entire life rested on each passing minute. The evaluation itself was long and thorough. The physician asked me about my routines, my finances, current events, and personal history. I answered steadily, drawing strength from years of managing my own affairs. Although I felt offended by the implication behind the questions, I refused to let resentment interfere. When it was over, I walked out exhausted but proud. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. I was declared fully competent, mentally sound, and capable of independent decision-making. Legally, I had won. Emotionally, I felt defeated. My daughter had been willing to strip me of my autonomy to regain control. That truth cut deeper than any court ruling ever could. As I sat alone in my living room that evening, I realized that some wounds never bleed, yet they leave scars that last a lifetime, and I knew that nothing between Lauren and me would ever be the same again. After the court confirmed my mental competence, life did not immediately return to normal. In many ways, it felt emptier than before. The phone stopped ringing. Messages from Lauren disappeared completely. Holidays passed in silence. I learned, slowly and painfully, how loud absence could be. Even in a house filled with memories, I sometimes felt like a guest in my own life. For several weeks, I moved through my days on autopilot. I painted without enthusiasm, attended classes without inspiration, and smiled when necessary. Inside, however, I was exhausted. Defending my independence had required more emotional strength than I realized. Now that the battle was over, I was left with the quiet aftermath. One afternoon, Margaret invited me to attend a meeting hosted by a local organization that supported elderly individuals facing financial and emotional abuse. At first, I hesitated. I was tired of revisiting painful experiences. Still, something in her voice suggested that this might help me more than I expected. I agreed to go. The meeting took place in a modest community center room. Folding chairs formed a circle. Coffee and pastries were placed on a small table in the corner. As people began sharing their stories, I listened carefully. A retired teacher had lost her savings to her grandson. A widower had been pressured into signing over his home. A former nurse described years of manipulation by her own children. Their voices trembled, yet their courage was undeniable. For the first time, I realized that I was not alone. When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened. I had not planned to talk, yet the words came anyway. I described the messages, the documents, the court hearing, and the quiet betrayal. My voice shook, but no one interrupted. They nodded with understanding. Some reached out to touch my arm gently. Their empathy felt like sunlight after a long winter. That evening, I returned home feeling lighter. In the weeks that followed, I became more involved with the organization. I helped organize workshops on financial awareness. I volunteered to speak at local senior centers. Sharing my experience transformed my pain into purpose. Instead of feeling ashamed, I felt useful. At the same time, my relationship with Noah began to deepen. He started calling me more often, usually in the evenings after finishing his homework. He asked about my art projects and told me about school. Sometimes, I sensed his worry beneath his cheerful tone. I listened without criticizing his parents. I wanted to be a safe place, not another source of conflict. Through these conversations, I learned to love without control. I also began creating more space for joy. I opened my backyard studio to neighborhood children twice a week. We painted sunsets, flowers, and imaginary worlds. Their laughter filled the house again. I organized small charity exhibitions, selling my artwork to raise funds for senior advocacy programs. Purpose gave my days structure. Service gave them meaning. Gradually, my sleep improved. My appetite returned. I started taking long morning walks, noticing details I had once overlooked. The scent of desert rain, the sound of wind through mesquite trees, the warmth of sunlight on my face. These small moments reminded me that healing did not happen all at once. It happened quietly, through repetition and patience. One evening, while checking my email, I noticed a brief news update about an ongoing investigation involving Brian's former business partners. Lawsuits were multiplying, financial records were being reviewed. The story was far from over. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. Whatever consequences were coming, I knew I was no longer standing alone. I had rebuilt myself from the inside out. and I was ready for whatever truth would emerge next. If you are still watching and feeling inspired by this journey of rebuilding, please comment number 8 below to let me know you are with me. The final outcome will surprise you in ways you may not expect. Now, let us move on to the conclusion. Time has a quiet way of moving forward, even when lives are breaking and rebuilding at the same time. Months passed after I began working with the senior advocacy group, and gradually, my days settled into a steady rhythm. I taught my classes, organized small community events, and spent long evenings painting in my studio. Pain no longer ruled my thoughts, though it still visited from time to time, reminding me of everything that had been lost. News about Brian surfaced slowly at first. Short articles appeared in local papers, followed by longer investigative reports. Former investors came forward. Financial records were examined. Bank statements revealed patterns of deception that could no longer be ignored. Each headline felt distant, yet deeply personal. Every revelation confirmed what I had suspected for so long. Desperation had driven him to destroy everything around him. Eventually, the case reached its conclusion. Brian was found responsible for multiple counts of financial fraud and misrepresentation. He was ordered to repay significant damages and barred from participating in investment activities. The legal language was formal and restrained, but the meaning was clear. His choices had consequences. Lauren's life unraveled alongside his. Without Brian's income and burdened by overwhelming debt, she filed for personal bankruptcy. Her professional license as a real estate agent was suspended after investigators linked her to unauthorized transactions connected to my property. Clients disappeared. Colleagues distanced themselves. The confident woman I once knew vanished beneath layers of stress and regret. Their marriage did not survive the storm. They separated quietly, without public drama. The house they had worked so hard to maintain was sold to settle outstanding obligations. What remained was divided and dispersed, leaving little stability behind. I learned most of this through indirect channels, brief updates from acquaintances and news articles. Lauren never contacted me directly. Then one afternoon, Noah arrived at my door with a suitcase and red-rimmed eyes. He did not explain much. He did not need to. I welcomed him without questions. Having him in my home again changed everything. We established simple routines, shared breakfasts, evening walks, quiet study sessions at the kitchen table. I helped him with school projects. He helped me in the garden. Slowly, laughter returned to rooms that had been silent for too long. At the same time, my involvement in community work expanded. I organized a small art exhibition featuring works created by seniors in recovery programs. The proceeds supported legal aid services for vulnerable elders. Watching people find confidence through creativity reminded me why I had survived my own struggle. I never celebrated Brian's downfall. I never rejoiced in Lauren's losses. Instead, I chose acceptance. Anger would not restore what had been broken. Bitterness would only poison what remained. Forgiveness, even unspoken, allowed me to breathe freely again. Some evenings, I sat on the porch with Noah, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. In those moments, I felt grounded in the present, no longer haunted by the past or anxious about the future. Justice had spoken, not through revenge, not through cruelty, but through truth. And in its quiet voice, I found peace. On quiet mornings, I often stand in my backyard before the day fully begins. The air is cool, the lavender sways gently in the breeze, and the mountains rest silently in the distance. In those moments, I feel grounded in a way I never did during the months of fear and uncertainty. This house, once a battlefield of legal documents and hidden intentions, has returned to being simply my home. Sometimes, I think about how quickly life can change. One message, one conversation, One discovery was enough to unravel decades of trust. I remember the woman I was before everything happened, confident, yet unaware of how fragile security could be. I also recognize the woman I have become, more cautious, more honest with herself, and stronger than she ever imagined. Being a mother taught me how to give. It taught me patience, sacrifice, and unconditional love. But this journey taught me something equally important. Loving my child did not require me to surrender my voice. Protecting my dignity was not selfish, it was necessary. I learned that boundaries are not walls meant to divide families, but lines meant to preserve respect. I still love Lauren. That truth has never changed. Some nights, I wonder if she thinks of me when she passes familiar places or hears an old song we once shared. Perhaps one day we will talk again. Perhaps we will not. I have learned to accept both possibilities without bitterness. Today, my life is simple. I paint, I teach. I walk with Noah in the evenings and listen to his dreams about the future. I open my home to neighbors and students. I contribute where I can. I live without fear of losing myself. As the sun rises higher, its light touches every corner of the garden. I breathe deeply and smile. I kept my home. I kept my independence. Most importantly, I kept my sense of worth. And that is something no one can ever take away from me. Life often teaches its deepest lessons through moments of loss, courage, and difficult choices. Strength is not found in avoiding pain, but in facing it with honesty and self-respect. True independence is not about standing alone, but about standing firmly in one's own values. When trust is broken, healing begins with clarity, boundaries, and the willingness to protect one's dignity. Every person deserves the right to live with purpose, to be heard, and to choose their own path without fear or pressure. In the end, peace comes not from pleasing others, but from staying true to oneself. Growth is quiet, resilience is patient, and wisdom is earned through experience. May this story remind us all that self-worth is priceless, and that it is never too late to reclaim it. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments. And do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more meaningful stories.